Hello, everyone. This is Batuka, the founder of Uservision. As Uservision, we help brands to understand their consumers more effectively through agile qualitative insights. Today, we have Don Peppers with us, one of the founding founders of customer experience. Don, thank you very much for allocating the time today for us.
Delighted to be here, Batuka. Looking forward to this.
Perfect. So today we're going to talk about understanding humans, how to shift from becoming customer-centric to human-centric, and its implications in the business world.
Right.
So, dear Don, you have written this article over finding the right balance between exploration and exploitation in a business setting. To quote, the success of any complex system, from ant colonies to beehives to businesses, depends on striking a balance between exploiting known resources and exploring new resources. Could you elaborate on this?
Mhm. Yes, I was referring to the natural quality of what biologists and physicists call a complex adaptive system, a system of moving parts or entities that is self-preserving. So a beehive or an ant colony, a national economy, a business, they're all complex adaptive systems. And to survive, a complex adaptive system needs to adapt to its changing environment so that when the climate changes, the bees do things differently, and bears and foxes. And when the climate changes in the economy, businesses do things differently. That's a changing environment. And they have to balance two functions. They have to balance the function of exploiting their current food resources, whatever resources they have. For a business, food resources are basically their knowledge of how to produce and manufacture or serve a set of customers and so forth. How to make money with a certain business model. That's what they're exploiting. But you also have to balance that with exploring for additional food sources. So bees are known to scour the area around their beehive, and they'll reliably find any food source, which are nectar flowers, within about a kilometer or two of the beehive, even though their beehive might be stacked with 8 months of piled up honey already in storage. So you have to balance exploring for additional food sources with exploiting existing food sources. That's really the thing. And many businesses overemphasize exploitation of their existing business model without enough emphasis on exploring for additional variations of that model.
Yeah, great analogy. And I think you had a very interesting example over this with 3M.
3M is an ideal example. 3M is one of the most creative and innovative companies in the world. They gave us Post-it notes and Scotch tape, but they also do industrial adhesives and medical and other instruments. Uh, but in the late 1990s, 3M had fallen a little bit on hard times financially. Their numbers weren't up to speed, and their board was concerned that they were not as profitable as they ought to be. And so they brought in a new CEO, a guy named James McNerney. He came from GE, where he was a student of the Six Sigma approach to quality improvement. That Six Sigma is a classic way to do a better and better job of exploiting your value proposition. You eliminate variation in the manufacturing and other processes. Six Sigma is six standard deviations away from a normal. That means that only one variation, one error in every, 3 or 4 errors in every million instances, as opposed to the typical company that does 3,500 or 5,000 errors in a process. So Six Sigma strips the variability out of the exploitation process, and they got more profitable initially, but soon 3M found that it stopped creating much. It didn't create much. And what happened was 3M began to fall behind because they weren't bringing out any new products at all. They weren't uncovering any new innovations. So they brought in a new CEO, a guy named George Buckley. He's a Brit, and George Buckley took the Six Sigma process. He kept it in place in the manufacturing area, but he took it off the heads of the research and development folks. Because as Buckley said, you know, Six Sigma is it's a great tool for managing your business, but you can't schedule yourself for two good ideas on Tuesday and another good idea on Thursday. That's just not the way innovation works, because exploration is about creativity and discovery. And you don't know what you're going to discover until you begin exploring. If you knew what you're going to create or explore for, it wouldn't be creation or exploration. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah, it's a perfect example. And what I've seen in the market is that most companies that I know and the brands that we work with do not provide such autonomy to market research
Right.
strategy and research and development divisions. So, why do you think brands have such differences during their decision-making processes, and what are the implications of this phenomenon?
Well, look, any large organization is going to solidify itself around the processes and operations that most efficiently realize whatever value proposition they've come up with. If they manufacture toothpaste, then they organize the whole thing around doing that as efficiently and inexpensively as possible so that they can maximize their market share and their value to shareholders. And that's a logical kind of thing. But human beings, they become habituated to this and they get used to it. And then there is a psychology in any large group which resists change and creativity. Creativity is a subversive force in an organization because anytime I come up with a new idea that in order to have that idea actualized at all, I have to undermine the years, maybe decades, perhaps centuries worth of tradition and process that's already been inculcated by all these people. So companies are not different from governments or any other kind of organization. They simply become ossified, okay, hardened around their exploitation processes because they've been successful. But when their environment changes, okay, when the weather changes, or when a new technology is invented, or when a new government does some kind of deregulatory act, that environmental change forces them to explore for additional variations in their business model.
Yeah, and it changes more rapidly than ever before nowadays.
It changed, yes, and the environment, the business environment especially, is changing more rapidly than ever before because of technology's rush.
Exactly, exactly. And what we realized is that nowadays brands have access to a myriad of analytics tools, quantitative data, or big data to understand what consumers do. But what consumers say and do may not depict the whole picture. So we have seen numerous cases where data is misread due to due to not understanding the proper context.
Right.
So you had several stories over this problem. Would you like to tell us one of them?
Yeah, yeah. Think about the difference between voice of customer data, feedback from customers, and observational data. Okay, you can observe your click-through rate on your website, let's say, or how many products are ordered, or what the defect rate is in your assembly line. Those are observational data. But when I ask a customer, how satisfied were you with our brand, or how likely would you be to recommend us? Uh, that's a subjective question I'm posing to a customer. Now, there's no better authority on the quality of a customer experience than the customer themselves. But customers are humans, and humans are moody. They have emotions. If I ask you how satisfied were you with our brand, your answer is relative to what? My life in general? Let me just give you a couple of quick examples. I'm going to share my screen for this, and I'm going to talk about AT&T first. AT&T, hang on a minute. AT&T noticed that its customer satisfaction scores didn't seem to be rational. And the CFO pointed out to the director of customer satisfaction that satisfaction scores were in some markets very low and their market share was growing and big, like New York and Chicago. In other markets like Atlanta and Dallas, their market share was low, even though satisfaction was high. So why is that? And they were ready to, the CFO was ready to cancel the surveys themselves. But what AT&T found was that they needed to measure customer satisfaction relative to a basket of principal competitors in each different market. Because guess what? In New York, people rate everybody. They're unhappy all the time. They rate everybody low, but they don't rate you as low as the others, perhaps. Whereas in Atlanta or Dallas or Denver, people are more happy and they rate everybody high, but they don't rate you as high as they rate others. So AT&T began using a metric that they termed customer value add, CVA, and it actually did correlate very well with market share. Here's a graph showing a market share and customer value add with the line at the center shows the correlation coefficient. And so now they've normalized their voice of customer data across different markets. I can also tell you another story, a very interesting story. Also, one more thing. Changes in CVA proved to be a 4-month leading indicator of changes in market share. You see that?
Yeah.
So let me tell you about another company, another large enterprise. Their bonuses were canceled. The executives' bonuses were canceled because this company, a big company, not in the U.S., they had put their executives on gated bonuses, and they based their bonuses on the strategic NPS score for their company. If strategic NPS declined significantly, a large portion of executive bonuses were canceled. So the executives, that got executives all involved in improving the quality of the customer experience. It's a laudable objective. But one year, toward the end of the year, NPS declined, and let me just show you the graph. Here's the graph, okay? And here is where bonuses were canceled toward the end of 2013. Now, let me tell you how they measured strategic NPS. They came to me and they wanted to know how could we improve our customer experience so our NPS doesn't go down. All right, I'm the customer experience guy, and so they came to me and they wanted to know. And I asked them how did they measure strategic NPS, and they said, well, every month we call 400 customers chosen at random, and we get about an 80% response rate. So it's statistically, there's no sample bias, it's statistically reliable and so forth. And we asked them the question on a scale of, was 1 to 10, how likely would you be to recommend our brand? That's the NPS question, and we do the score that way. And I said, well, what did your competitors' NPS scores do? And they said, well, we don't measure our competitors. Why would we do that? We just want to, our bonuses are based on our NPS. I said, well, your competitors could have gone down also. You don't really, I'll tell you what, let's look at the consumer sentiment in your country. And so we went to the Ministry of Commerce, and they had a figure for monthly consumer confidence in this country. And let me show you this graph. You see the similarity? I mean, if anything, these executives, their bonuses should have been increased because NPS at their company didn't fall off nearly the same steep a cliff that consumer confidence fell off of at the end of 2013 for some reason. So the point about this, Batukan, is that you have to take the subjective opinions of people whose answers you solicit. You have to normalize them both geographically and over time. You have to be careful with the national consumer sentiment, the sentiment in different cities and regions and so forth. And a lot of companies, they focus on these VOC surveys and they think it's the end all of everything, but it's not. It's the beginning of the discussion. Then you have to go back and face the music.
Exactly. So it's also a problem that we always face. So it's very straightforward, very easy to boil everything down to a single number, to a single score, and even compare everything with that. But I personally think also that brands are putting too much emphasis on NPS scores or misusing them, according also The example that you have showed is very similar to a case as such.
Yeah, and
So
I don't think it's a fault of NPS per se.
yeah,
Okay, I think if NPS weren't around, I think brands would also be misusing, unintentionally, but
yeah,
misusing customer satisfaction scores as well. They both have the same um, flaw. It's a flaw, but it's not a debility. I mean, you can still use voice of customer data to good purpose, but you have to know how to use it. That's all.
exactly. So what do you recommend for brands? Like, what do you think about how NPS scores are utilized nowadays, and how to utilize them in a more efficient way? Let's say.
Well, NPS particularly, I think, is a little overhyped. Everybody wants to be NPS, and I think the key advantage of NPS is that it can be easily explained to a mathematically challenged senior executive. It's easy to explain. Look, we do the nines and tens. We call them promoters. We do the ones through sixes, or ones and twos, and they're detractors, and anybody in between, is in between. We subtract the detractors from the promoters, and okay, and that's an easy concept to understand. The problem is a couple things. Whenever you take a sample of a population, it's an approximation of the population's actual state, right? And the smaller your sample is, the more variance there is, the less representative it is, the less it's more possible that it's off somewhat. And if you combine two statistically approximate ideas, you get an exponential increase in the um, inaccuracy part of it. And NPS does that three times. They combine the nines and tens, they combine the ones through sixes, they subtract one from the other. That's three different combinations to get to that one number. So it's a real problem. And NPS and CSAT, neither one of these metrics is equipped with the diagnostic tools you need to understand the why behind. You might understand that the statistic, even if you do it in a valid metric way, when you really correct for all these things, you might find that your NPS or your customer satisfaction has declined by a percentage or two or three or 10 from this quarter, from last quarter, let's say. But you don't know why. All you know is the what. And understanding the why is really critical, which I think is one of the secrets behind Uservision success with qualitative information, because we talk about the why of things.
Exactly, exactly. So we already talked that we live in an ever-changing world, and the times and consumer behavior change more rapidly than ever before. And the consumption of today is relative to time and place. So what would you recommend to the brands for understanding thick data, understanding the why more effectively?
Well, I think you need to think carefully about the purpose of this thick data, as you call it. Thick data is harder to quantify, harder to tabulate. It's more anecdotal. It's a narrative usually. You want to understand the why behind someone's decline in satisfaction or their improvement in satisfaction, because without that, you don't have any cause and effect. You can't, if you can't determine the cause of this effect, then you can't mimic the effect later. I mean, it's impossible. Um, if I don't find out the story behind the data, okay, then I don't have any action plan. I have no where to go with how can I reproduce this great result, or how can I avoid this negative result. The data doesn't tell me. And so when I have data specifically, especially when I have data that indicates any kind of change in the situation, okay, and I want to understand why that change took place, that's when I really need the thick data to dig in to that observed pattern problem. I'm a pattern. I look for patterns and disruptions in patterns, and now my pattern has been disrupted. I want to understand why, but in order to do that, I have to have the narrative behind it.
Exactly, exactly. So, Don, research, as we see it, is inherently a process of discovery. And
Right.
oftentimes I encountered brands, both on the client side, but also on the researcher side, approaching research too rigidly. As we have discussed earlier, if we do the same thing and ask the same questions as our competitors do, then we will get the same results over and over again. So, what do you think about this phenomenon?
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but when you have a company that's been successful, and so all the processes for exploiting their very successful business model are fairly hardwired into the organization, it's it's very difficult to look at research as a discovery tool. It's much more a confirmation tool. You use it to confirm or maybe disconfirm your hypothesis going forward. But you don't change your hypothesis, and just think about it this way: classic quantitative research is about putting numbers into tables, right? And the numbers might be surprising. You might actually discover in the quantitative research that this number is higher than you thought with this one, but the table was structured in advance of the research fundamentally. So the table is a boundary line, and creativity doesn't go beyond that table. I think one of the things about Uservision's research is by combining the real-time qualitative research with real-time quantitative research, you can make quick changes to the structure of the table to adapt to the story that seems to be coming out from the qualitative research. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think I sincerely think that this adaptability, like being more agile, basically
Yes.
provides.
Agile is a great word. Agile, the whole world is becoming agile. Why? Because technology is changing so rapidly that businesses today have to be better able to adapt today to new changing environments than they were 100 years ago. Okay? You could have started a business, an auto manufacturing business 100 years ago, and you still have basically the same kinds of industrial processes going on today. They're just more modern. But if, for instance, automobiles become totally autonomous and you can call one on demand, you don't have to own one, and they're electric, they don't, when the business model changes radically, you need to be out there exploring for possible ways that this new business model might come to be. And the best way to do that as an organization is to have agile methodologies where you instead of trying to develop something from beginning to end with a long development process, but you have agile sprints. I tried this, I tried that, I tried this, and oh, this didn't work, but this was so I'm better now. I'm better. I'm better. I do a lot of coaching for startup teams at Stanford. I help Steve Blank with his Lean Launchpad entrepreneurial ranch, I think he calls it. And students come and they have startups, and we talk to them about the process of getting a startup concept off and running. And the very first, or one of the very first ideas is you have to find product market fit. And to do that, you have to approach potential customers, people you think are potential customers, and show them what we call a minimum viable product. It's not an actual full working product because you haven't spent the time and energy to really develop it and manufacture it. And maybe it's just a model. Maybe it's simply a piece of paper that describes it, or a website that looks like it's real, but it's not, not real. And you want to understand how they're going to relate to the product. All those are narrative issues. It's interviewing customers is the way an entrepreneur creates a startup. They get out of the building, they go talk to people, and if they took a survey out of the box with how many people are going to like this product that's in the vision of the founders, that survey may or may not be accurate, but the product itself is going to be developed over time by constantly changing and exploring for more customer benefits.
Exactly. I think that's a really good point because when you look at the same direction over and over again and ask the same questions, then your exploration phase becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because you look at the same
Correct.
direction since many years. And actually, talking with you, I just realized that that's why, like being agile and this exploration phase, brands have to put more emphasis on these exploration instead of exploitation nowadays, because
Yes.
the
Yeah.
environment changes more rapidly, not the business setting changes per se, but because of the environment's more rapid change, you cannot box, you cannot limit your knowledge, you cannot limit your acquiring of knowledge in certain boxes right now. That's the
I would agree with that.
paradigm
And
shift.
I go further than that. I think one of the things that's attractive about Uservision is that your whole research model is based on a kind of agile research.
Yeah,
Okay. Yes, you feel this that this your client asks you to fill a survey to figure this out, and you might have a plan for a survey, but in between, as you're putting the survey together, before you complete the survey, you're constantly seasoning it with what we've learned from different stories that customers or potential customers might be saying. So you're adjusting constantly, and then the survey, when you get it done, it's usually I'm not an expert in your business, but I understand that it's usually a little more comprehensive than the original project they had, and sometimes delivered even less expensively with lower time.
exactly, exactly. Because if you rigidly are stuck in understanding a certain point, like a certain way, looking at a certain way, then you just learn everything about that certain aspect. But there are um, billions of other aspects to cover that topic, like revolves around that certain topic.
Right, right.
So if you're not agile, you just go to a straight direction, you actually miss the shortcuts that could actually
Yes.
help you go to the same way. Exactly,
Mhm.
exactly. So, yeah, as you mentioned, we are also evangelizing agile research methodologies whilst understanding consumers. So
Right.
this means we start our exploration phase with a research sprint and could change the sample size, questions, methodologies, target audience according to our learnings.
Mhm.
So, why do you think brands should opt in for agile research per se?
Well, I think the reason should be obvious, and that is if you want to keep up with the changing environment, the faster technology changes, the faster your business environment is going to change. You ought to be doing agile research all the time. You ought to be constantly exploring. Doesn't mean that you can't also and you shouldn't also exploit. You should definitely continue to exploit your business model to the extent possible to create as much value as you can today. But realize that the business model will change with the environment. And if you don't change with it, you'll be out of a business sooner or later.
Exactly. And I think that's the difference becoming human centric instead of like transforming to become human centric instead of consumer centric. Because if you see your audience as a consumer, then you just are trying to understand a certain aspect and market or sell a product according to that consumer consumer face of
Right.
the audience. But if you're human centric, then you can understand their needs more holistically and act accordingly. And that makes all the difference in the successful brands as I've seen in the world right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree 100%.
Great. And my last question will be done. You recently joined our advisory board. So I'm curious what specifically convinced you to join our endeavor.
Well, I was attracted by your value proposition, by your business model. I think you're the wave of the future. I think probably 10 years from now, every research firm in business will be using your model. That is, they will be combining qualitative research to seize and accelerate the accuracy of their quantitative research. And so and in addition, the whole issue of the human angle of research appeals to me. I do think that many companies get so consumed with the exploitation of an existing business model, they dehumanize the processes. But human beings are changeable. They have moods. They have good days and bad days. And I think the more businesses can accommodate uh, those uh, uh, those nuances and be aware of them and try to understand them, the better those businesses are going to be.
Exactly. Exactly. So, Don, thank you very much for sharing all this knowledge with us. This is the end of our webinar and my questions. And thank you all of our listeners for listening to us. And hope to see you all in another podcast.
Great, Dr. Green. Good to talk to you.
Good to talk to you, Don. Have a nice day.